Poor girl begs billionaire for a pair of school shoes. Promises to pay him back. His response surprises everyone. Miles left the office building, adjusting his tie for the third time. The fabric felt too tight. Or maybe it was just the choking sensation that always came after meetings. More numbers, more charts, more projections. Another afternoon wasted talking about things that didn't really matter. The Thursday sun beat down on the asphalt. Miles glanced at his watch, 3:30 in the afternoon. He could hail a cab, as he always did, but something made him hesitate. Maybe a walk to the parking garage would be a good idea. Maybe the fresh air would help get that bitter taste out of his mouth. He loosened his tie and started walking. The streets were busy. People rushed past, each lost in their own worlds. Miles knew that feeling well. For years, he had lived like that, alone in the middle of a crowd. His company grew, profits increased, but he still returned home every night to an empty apartment. He ate dinner alone, watched television alone, slept alone. It was an organized, predictable life. No surprises, no disappointments, nothing. Miles was almost at his car when he heard a small voice behind him. "Mister!" He turned, slightly annoyed. Probably another street vendor or someone asking for money. Miles already had a response ready on the tip of his tongue, but when he turned around, the words died in his throat. A little blonde girl was standing on the sidewalk, about 6 feet away. She must have been about 5 years old, maybe younger. Her golden hair was tied in 2 messy pigtails, and her light blue eyes shone with a mix of hope and fear. Miles looked down. The girl's shoes were destroyed. The white sneakers, which must have been white once, were grey with dirt, with holes on the sides and the sole peeling away. You could see her little toes through the holes. "Yes," he said, more gently than he had intended. The girl took a deep breath, as if gathering all the courage in the world. Her small hands were trembling slightly. "Everyone laughs at me. I just need new shoes for school." She looked down, wiggling her toes inside the old shoes. "My shoe hurts." Miles felt something strange in his chest. When was the last time someone had spoken to him with such sincerity? When was the last time someone had approached him without wanting something in return, money, favors, connections? The girl lifted her small face and looked him straight in the eye. In those blue eyes, Miles saw a determination that few adults possessed. "When I grow up, I'll pay you back." The words came out with such force that a few people on the street turned to look. The girl didn't care. She kept staring at Miles, waiting for an answer. Something very strange happened in Miles's chest at that moment. It was as if a door that had been locked for a long time had creaked open just a crack. A small but real light shone through that opening. He looked around, trying to process what was happening. Across the street was a shoe store. The red sign glowed in the afternoon sun. "What's your name?" he asked. "Mira." "Mira." Miles repeated the name, as if testing how it sounded. "Come with me, Mira." They crossed the street together. Miles couldn't explain why he was doing this. It wasn't part of his routine. It wasn't planned. It made no sense from a financial or logical point of view, but for the first time in years, he didn't want to analyze. He just wanted to do. The shoe store was small and smelled of new leather. The salesman, a middle-aged man with glasses, approached as soon as they entered. "Good afternoon. How can I help you?" "We need a pair of shoes for her," Miles said, pointing to Mira. The girl stood beside him, still a bit shy, but with her eyes shining with expectation. The salesman measured Mira's feet and brought several options. She tried on a pair of black shoes, too serious for a child. Then, a pair of pink sneakers, pretty, but tight. Finally, the salesman brought a pair of white sneakers with pink details on the sides. When Mira put on the third pair, her eyes lit up like 2 stars. "It doesn't hurt," she said, standing up and taking a few small steps around the store. "Look how soft it is." She ran from one side to the other, testing the new shoes. The salesman smiled, Miles smiled, and even other customers in the store smiled, seeing the girl's joy. "This one," Mira said, pointing to her feet. "Please, mister." Miles nodded to the salesman. "Can you bag the old shoes?" "Of course." While the salesman prepared the purchase, Mira approached Miles. "Thank you," she said quietly. "My mum will be so happy." "Your mum?" Yeah, she works really hard, but the money is never enough. She always says that one day she'll buy me new shoes, but Mira shrugged. She gets sad when she says that. Miles felt that strange sensation in his chest again, stronger this time. What's your mother's name? Diane. Miles paid the bill, $45 that meant nothing to him, but everything to this little girl. When they left the store, Mira ran a few feet on the sidewalk, testing out her new shoes. Now no one will laugh at me at school, she shouted, twirling on the sidewalk. Miles watched her, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time. It was as if the world had suddenly gained color. Mira stopped twirling and came closer to him. Without warning, she gave him a quick, tight hug around his leg. "Thank you, nice man," she said, and then ran off. "Hey," Miles called out, "what's your last name?" But Mira had already turned the corner and disappeared. Miles stood there for a few minutes, looking at the spot where she had vanished. He touched his leg where she had hugged him. He could still feel the small warmth of her arms. When he finally reached his car, Miles couldn't stop thinking about the girl. The way she had said, "When I grow up, I'll pay you back." The determination in those blue eyes, the pure joy when she put on the new shoes. On the way home, he caught himself smiling in traffic. Other drivers must have thought he was crazy. That night, Miles ate dinner alone as always, but something was different. The food seemed to have more flavor. The television, less noise, the apartment, less empty. Before going to sleep, he stood by the window looking down at the street. He had done a good deed today. He had truly helped someone. When was the last time he had felt like this? Miles smiled to himself. $45, an insignificant amount for him, had transformed a child's day. There was something comforting in that. For the first time in years, Miles slept with a sense of peace. And for the first time in years, his dreams were not about spreadsheets or meetings. They were about the pure joy in a little girl's eyes when she put on new shoes, and about how doing good can be more rewarding than any closed deal. A week had passed since his encounter with Mira, but Miles couldn't get the girl out of his head. He had already gone back to that street twice, looking around in hopes of seeing her again. He felt foolish, a 42-year-old businessman searching for a child he barely knew. But something about her had touched a dormant part of him. On Monday afternoon, Miles left the office early. He told his secretary he had important appointments, but the truth was he couldn't stand being trapped within those four walls any longer. The meetings seemed longer, the reports more tedious, the conversations more empty. He walked along the same sidewalk where he had found Mira. The autumn sun painted the tree leaves in golden hues, and a light breeze swayed the branches. Miles took a deep breath, feeling the fresh air fill his lungs. Why had he never noticed how beautiful this part of the city was? That's when he heard a familiar voice behind him. "Shoe man!" Miles turned so quickly he nearly tripped. There she was, her blonde hair bouncing in two pigtails that were neater than last time. She wore a jacket that was too thin for the weather, but the shoes, the ones he had bought, shone white and clean on her feet. "Mira," he said, and realized he was grinning like a fool. The girl ran to him, stopping a few feet away. Her blue eyes sparkled with a pure joy that Miles had forgotten existed in the world. "You remembered my name," she exclaimed, looking impressed. "Of course I remembered. How could I not?" Mira looked down at her own feet and then up at Miles. "Look, they're still new. I clean them every day after school." "They look great on you," Miles replied, genuinely happy to see her. "Now nobody laughs at me," she said, shaking her head seriously. "Before, Tommy Perkins would always point at my old shoes and say I was poor. Now he stays quiet." Something in Miles's chest tightened. The thought of someone mocking this child bothered him more than it should have. "Tommy Perkins doesn't sound like a very nice boy." "He's not," Mira agreed, wrinkling her nose. "But it doesn't matter anymore." She did a little spin, showing off the shoes. "Thanks again, mister." "My name is Miles. Miles Fletcher." "Miles," she repeated, testing the name. "It suits you. Sounds like the name of someone important." He laughed. "I don't know if I'm that important." "Do you have a car?" "I do." "Then you're important," she concluded with the simple logic of children. Miles was about to explain that owning a car didn't make someone important, but something in her face made him stop. Mira was looking at him with such genuine admiration that he felt a lump in his throat. "And you?" he asked, trying to change the subject. "What are you doing out here alone?" "I'm waiting for my mom." Mira pointed to a laundromat across the street. "She works there in the afternoons. I stay at school until 3. Then I come here and wait for her to finish her shift." Miles looked at his watch. It was almost 5. "So you wait here every day?" Mira shrugged as if it were nothing. "Only when there's no school. On other days, I stay with Mrs. Geller, our neighbor. But she's sick today." Something in the casual tone with which Mira spoke about waiting alone on the street for hours made Miles's heart ache. He looked at the girl's old backpack, with its broken zipper and patched straps. "What time does your mum get off?" "At 6, Mira answered, sitting on a wooden bench in front of the laundromat. She took a worn book out of her backpack. "I read while I wait." Miles hesitated for a moment. Did he have plans for the evening? No, nothing besides the usual solitary dinner and maybe an hour or 2 of work at home. Quick decisions were not his strong suit. He liked to analyze, plan, consider all the variables. But in the last few days, something had changed. "Would you like to go somewhere while you wait?" he asked, before he could change his mind. "We could get a snack or—" Miles realized he had no idea what 5-year-olds like to do, or whatever you prefer. Mira's eyes widened. "Can we go to the backpack store?" she asked hopefully. "I always look through the window, but I've never been inside." Miles smiled. "Of course. Should we leave a note for your mom at the laundromat first?" They crossed the street together. The laundromat smelled of fabric softener and hot steam. Behind the counter, a woman in her 30s was folding sheets with mechanical efficiency. Her blonde hair was tied in a tight bun, and dark circles marked her tired face. Even so, Miles noticed she was beautiful, with the same blue eyes as Mira. "Mommy!" Mira called, running to the counter. The woman looked up and her face transformed instantly. The weariness gave way to a warm smile. "Hi, sweetie. Did you finish all your homework?" "Yes, I did." Mira turned and pointed to Miles, who had remained standing near the door. "Mommy, this is the man who bought my shoes." The woman's smile vanished, replaced by an expression of suspicion and concern. She dropped the sheets and quickly approached. "Mira, what did I say about talking to strangers?" she whispered, but not quietly enough for Miles not to hear. "But he's not a stranger," Mira protested. "He's Miles." The woman looked at Miles with a mixture of gratitude and apprehension. Thank you for the shoes," she said, her voice firm but gentle. "My daughter hasn't stopped talking about it." "It was very generous of you." "It was nothing," Miles replied, suddenly feeling uncomfortable under her intense gaze. "She's an amazing girl." A brief smile crossed the woman's face. "Yes, she is." She extended her hand. "I'm Diane Walker, Mira's mother." "Miles Fletcher," he said, shaking her hand, noticing the calluses on her palms and her short, unpolished nails. "For the hands of someone who works hard. Mommy, Miles is going to take me to see the backpacks," Mira announced, bouncing with excitement. "Can I go? Please, can I go?" Diane frowned, looking from Mira to Miles. "I don't know if that's a good idea, sweetie. Mr. Fletcher probably has important things to do, and I'll be done in an hour." "Actually," Miles hurried to say, "I don't have any plans, and I'd be happy to take Mira to see the backpacks. I promised to bring her back before 6. Diane bit her lip, clearly conflicted. Miles understood her dilemma. Trust a stranger or disappoint her daughter? He tried to look as trustworthy as possible, which was ironic, considering he spent his life closing deals with people who didn't trust him. "Please, Mommy," Mira begged. After a moment of hesitation, Diane nodded. "All right, but you'll be back here at 6 o'clock sharp, right?" "I promise," Miles said, feeling a wave of relief and something else. Happiness. It was strange, but he was genuinely happy to be able to spend more time with Mira. "And you, young lady," Diane knelt in front of her daughter, "behave, listen to Mr. Fletcher, and don't ask for anything more than what he offers. Understand?" "Yes, Mommy," Mira replied solemnly. Before they left, Miles noticed Diane's worried glance. She was trusting him with her most precious possession, and he felt the weight of that responsibility. The backpack store was 2 blocks away. Along the way, Mira talked non-stop about school, her friends, her teacher, Miss Collins, who had red hair and wore funny glasses, and how the new shoes had changed her life. Even Miss Collins noticed. She said they were very nice and asked where we bought them. I told her an angel bought them for me. Miles laughed. An angel? I don't know if I'm quite that. Angels help people, Mira explained seriously. You helped me, so you're like an angel. The simplicity of her logic left him speechless. The backpack store was small but colorful. Dozens of models covered the walls, in all sizes and colors. Mira's eyes shone as if she were entering an amusement park. Look how many, she exclaimed, spinning slowly to take it all in. The salesman, a young man with piercings in his nose and eyebrow, approached. Can I help you? We're looking for a backpack for her, Miles replied, nodding toward Mira. We have several kids' models over there. The salesman pointed to a section with smaller, more colorful backpacks. Which one do you like, little one? Mira walked slowly among the shelves, touching the backpacks reverently, as if they were made of crystal. She stopped in front of a light blue backpack with silver stars. This one is beautiful, she whispered. Miles approached and picked up the backpack. It was good quality, with sturdy material and reinforced zippers. Want to try it on? Mira nodded, her eyes wide. Miles helped her put the backpack on and adjusted the straps. It seemed to have been made for her. What do you think? He asked, watching the girl's concentrated face. Mira took a few steps, feeling the weight of the empty backpack. Then she turned to the mirror on the wall and stared at her own reflection. A slow smile spread across her face. It's perfect, she said, almost voiceless. Miles didn't need to think twice. We'll take this one. While the salesman bagged the purchase, Mira stood quietly, looking at Miles with an expression he couldn't decipher. What is it? He asked, intrigued. Why are you doing this? She asked, with the direct curiosity of children. Miles thought for a moment. Why was he doing this? He wasn't known for random acts of charity. He wasn't the type of person who cared about strangers, so why did he care so much about this little girl he had met by chance? Because you deserve good things, he finally answered, and because it makes me happy to be able to help you. Mira seemed satisfied with the answer. She took his hand naturally, as if they did this every day. Thank you, Miles. The walk back to the laundromat was quiet. Mira, now calmer, told Miles about her dream. When I grow up, I want to be a doctor, she said, adjusting the new backpack on her shoulders. A doctor? That's amazing. Why? Mira looked at the ground, suddenly serious. My mum has a cough that won't go away. She says it's just from being tired, but I know it's more. I want to be a doctor to take care of her. And for people who don't have money to pay for expensive doctors. Miles felt a pang in his chest. It was surprising how a child so young already understood so much about life's difficulties. I'm sure you'll be an incredible doctor, he said, and realized he truly believed it. When they arrived at the laundromat, it was 5:50. Diane was at the door, looking at her watch anxiously, her face visibly relaxed when she saw them. Mommy, look what I got. Mira ran to her, turning to show off the new backpack. Diane looked at the backpack and then at Miles, a complicated expression crossing her face. It's beautiful, sweetie, she said, stroking her daughter's hair. Then to Miles, you didn't have to do that. I wanted to, he replied simply. Diane seemed to want to say something more, but just nodded. We need to go now, Mira. Thank Mr. Fletcher. Thank you, Miles. Mira hugged his leg, just as she had on the day of the shoes. Miles felt that familiar warmth in his chest. You're welcome, Mira. As he watched the mother and daughter walk away hand in hand, Miles realized he didn't want this to be the end. For the first time in years, he was looking forward to seeing someone again. Diane, he called out before he could think better of it. She stopped and turned around. Yes, I was thinking. Miles hesitated. What was he doing? Mira mentioned she needs a new school uniform. Diane frowned. She said that? Not exactly, but I noticed her coat is getting small, and I thought... Mr. Fletcher, Diane interrupted him gently, I appreciate your generosity, I really do, but I can't accept any more gifts. It's not a gift, Miles hurried to say. It's the loan. Like Mira said, she'll pay me back when she grows up. A small smile appeared at the corner of Diane's lips. She said that, did she? Word for word. Diane shook her head, but the smile remained. You're an interesting person, Miles Fletcher. Is that good or bad? I haven't decided yet. She adjusted her purse on her shoulder. We'll be at the uniform store on Saturday at 10 in the morning, 27 Maple Street. If you want to show up. Miles felt something he hadn't felt since he was a teenager, butterflies in his stomach. I'll be there. For the first time, he saw Diane truly smile, and he realized she had the same smile as Mira, not just on her lips, but in her eyes. See you Saturday, then. See you Saturday. Miles stood on the sidewalk, watching them walk away. The blonde girl with the new backpack full of stars, and the tired but strong mother. Two luminous beings who had somehow entered his life. That night, Miles didn't turn on the television. He sat on his apartment balcony and looked at the stars, thinking about the blue eyes that had smiled at him earlier. The daughter's eyes and the mother's eyes. For the first time in years, he was waiting for someone. And for the first time in years, the future seemed full of possibilities. Spring had arrived. The days were getting longer, the trees were getting new leaves, and Miles felt that he too was being reborn, somehow. It had been almost 3 months since he first met Mira, and his life had changed more than he could have imagined. He now had a different routine. On Mondays and Thursdays, he would pick Mira up from school and take her for a snack before meeting Diane at the laundromat. On Saturdays, he would spend the morning with them, either helping with groceries or just walking through the park. His apartment, once a cold and empty place, was beginning to show signs of change. On the coffee table, there was a small vase with flowers that he bought himself every week. On the refrigerator, a colorful drawing that Mira had made in school, a yellow house with 3 smiling figures in front. Miles was sitting in his office, trying to concentrate on financial reports. The clock read 4 in the afternoon. In an hour, he would be picking Mira up from school. He smiled at the thought of the girl running to meet him at the gate, her starry backpack bouncing on her back. The phone rang, pulling him from his thoughts. Mr. Fletcher, Mrs. Collins from Westwood Elementary School is online too, his secretary announced. Miles frowned. Mrs. Collins was Mira's teacher. Put her through, Claire. Mr. Fletcher. The teacher's voice sounded worried. I'm sorry to bother you at work, but Diane gave me your number for emergencies. Miles felt a tightness in his chest. Did something happen to Mira? No, don't worry. She's physically fine, but very upset. There was an incident in the classroom today. What kind of incident? The teacher hesitated. The children were talking about what their parents do. When it was Mira's turn, Tommy Perkins interrupted her and said some unpleasant things about her not having a father, about her mother being... Well, the words weren't kind. Miles gripped the phone tightly. That Tommy Perkins again. And what happened next? Mira was very quiet for a while. Then, during recess, she punched Tommy in the nose. Despite the seriousness of the situation, Miles had to suppress a smile. Is she in trouble? Technically, yes. We had to put her in detention, and we called her mother. But Diane is in the middle of an important shift and can't leave. That's why I'm calling you. I'm on my way right now, Miles said, already standing up. Thank you for letting me know. He drove to the school with a heavy heart. Although he admired Mira's courage, he knew she must be hurting. The girl was too proud to show weakness, but Miles had learned to read between the lines. Westwood Elementary School was a red brick building with a large playground. Miles parked and walked quickly to the main office. I'm Miles Fletcher, here to pick up Mira Walker. The secretary looked at him curiously. Are you a relative, now, sir? I'm a friend of the family. Mrs. Collins called me. After checking a list, the secretary nodded. She's in room 104 with Mrs. Collins. Miles walked through the empty hallways, the walls decorated with colorful drawings and school projects. He found room 104 and knocked lightly on the ajar door. Mrs. Collins, a young woman with red hair and round glasses, looked up. Mira was sitting in a chair in the corner, head down, her legs dangling without touching the floor. Mr. Fletcher, I'm so glad you came, the teacher said, standing up to greet him. Mira lifted her eyes. When she saw Miles, her face lit up for a second, but then returned to its serious expression. "Hey, kiddo," Miles said, kneeling in front of her. "I heard you had a tough day." Mira shrugged, not answering. "I'll let you two talk, Mrs." Collins said tactfully, leaving the room. When they were alone, Miles pulled over a chair that was too small for him and sat awkwardly beside Mira. "So, you punched Tommy Perkins?" Mira remained silent for a few seconds. Then, in a small voice, "He deserved it." "He probably did. But do you want to tell me what happened?" The girl shook her head, her eyes fixed on the floor. "Mira, you know you can tell me anything, right?" She bit her lip, fighting back tears. "Tommy said my mom is a... She couldn't repeat the word. "And he said you only hang out with us because you feel sorry for us." Miles felt a wave of anger and sadness at the same time. What kind of child said things like that? What kind of parents did that child have? "And you believed him?" he asked softly. Mira looked at him for the first time. "No, but I got angry." "I understand." Miles took her small hand. "But you know, sometimes people say mean things because they're unhappy. Tommy doesn't seem unhappy. He has everything he wants. Sometimes, those who have everything really have nothing," Miles said, remembering what his own life was like before meeting Mira and Diane. "And Tommy is wrong, you know. I don't stay with you out of pity. I stay because you are the most amazing people I've ever met." Mira's blue eyes filled with tears. "Really? Cross my heart." She finally smiled, but then quickly became serious again. "Mommy is going to be mad at me." "Probably a little," Miles admitted. "But she'll understand. Just don't make a habit of it, okay? Punching doesn't solve problems. It did with Tommy. He started crying like a baby." Miles tried in, but he couldn't hold back a laugh. "Even so, next time, tell an adult, okay?" Mira nodded, a little reluctantly. "I have something for you," she said suddenly, opening her backpack. "For me." The girl took out a folded piece of paper and handed it to him ceremoniously. "I can't pay you for the shoes, but I made you a present." Miles carefully unfolded the paper. It was a drawing made with colored pencils and markers. 2 stick figures, one tall, in a suit, and a small figure with pigtails and a blue dress. They were holding hands, and a large red heart hovered above them. At the top of the page, in crooked, colorful letters, was written, "Miles and Mira, best friends." "It's beautiful, Mira," he said, feeling a lump in his throat. "Because now you have a friend," she explained, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Everyone needs friends." Miles looked at the drawing for a long moment. How many expensive gifts had he received in his life? Watches, silk ties, rare bottles of wine. Nothing had touched him like this simple piece of paper with a child's drawing. "This is the best gift I've ever received," he said, and he had never said anything so true. Mira smiled, all the sadness of the day forgotten. "Really?" "Absolute truth." The girl stood up and hugged him, her little arms barely managing to circle his neck. "Thank you for coming to get me, Miles." "Whenever you need me, I'll be here," he replied, returning the hug. Later, after speaking with the principal and Mrs. Collins, Miles took Mira for ice cream before they met Diane. While the girl savored a large chocolate sundae, he took the drawing out of his pocket and looked at it again. "Miles and Mira, best friends." He folded the paper carefully and put it in his wallet, as if it were the most important document in the world. In a way, it was. That night, upon arriving home, Miles took an old frame he had stored in a drawer. He cleaned the glass, adjusted the drawing, and placed it on the nightstand next to his bed. The last thing he saw before falling asleep were those 2 stick figures holding hands under a big red heart. And, for the first time in a long time, Miles Fletcher fell asleep smiling, knowing he was no longer alone in the world, because now he had a friend. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows of Miles's office, creating golden patterns on the floor. He stared at the computer screen without really seeing the numbers, his thoughts far away. In recent weeks, his life had taken a turn he had never imagined. The phone rang, pulling him from his daydreams. "Mr. Fletcher, your meeting with the investment committee starts in 15 minutes. The voice of Claire, his secretary, came through the intercom. Thanks, Claire. I'll be there in a moment. Miles adjusted his tie and gathered his notes, but before he could stand up, his cell phone buzzed. It was a message from Mira, sent from Diane's phone. Are you coming today? I have a surprise. An involuntary smile crossed his face as he replied, Of course, I'll be at the park at 5. The meeting dragged on for 2 hours, but Miles barely noticed. Part of his mind remained fixed on the message, wondering what the surprise could be. In the past few months, he had learned that Mira's surprises could be anything, from a special rock found on the way to school to a new drawing for her medicine book. At 4:30, Miles did something he would never have done before. He asked to end a meeting early. I have an unavoidable appointment, he explained to his partners, who looked at him with poorly disguised astonishment. Miles Fletcher, the man who routinely extended meetings late into the night, was now in a hurry to leave. The park was 10 minutes from the office. When he arrived, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. Mira was already there, running around the central fountain, while Diane watched her from a nearby bench. Miles! Mira shouted upon seeing him, running in his direction. You really came! He knelt to receive her in a hug, something that had become natural between them. Of course I came. I wouldn't miss your surprise for anything. Diane approached with a calm smile. Lately, Miles had noticed a subtle change in her. Her shoulders seemed less tense, her smile came more easily, and sometimes her eyes lingered on him in a way that made his heart race. She's been excited since school, Diane commented, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. I could barely get her to eat dinner. So what's the big surprise? Miles asked Mira, who was practically bouncing with excitement. I can't tell you here, she replied, looking around as if spies might be listening. It has to be at our house. Miles looked at Diane, surprised. They always met in public places, the park, diners, the library, never at their home. Diane shrugged, but her smile indicated she was as involved in the conspiracy as Mira was. I think it's time you saw our home, she said simply. If you don't have other plans, of course. No plan could be more important, he replied sincerely. The apartment was a few blocks from the park, in a modest but well-maintained building. Miles followed the two of them up to the 3rd floor, watching how Mira skipped up the steps, and how Diane kept a protective hand near her daughter's back, ready to catch her if she stumbled. Apartment 12, Mira announced when they reached the hallway. Our little corner. Diane opened the door and Miles felt a pang of nervousness. Entering their home meant crossing a boundary, being admitted into an intimate space that few people knew. The apartment was small but surprisingly cozy. The living room had a 2-seater sofa with colorful cushions, a bookshelf with used books, and a few potted plants. On the wall, photos of Mira at different ages, a baby, a toddler on her first day of school. It's not much, Diane said, a touch of insecurity in her voice. But it's ours. It's perfect, Miles replied, and it truly was. Every corner of the apartment told a story, radiated warmth and care. Compared to his own minimalist and impersonal apartment, this place was overflowing with life. Now for the surprise, Mira announced, running to the kitchen. Miles followed Diane in, where a small table was already set for 3. There was a simple dish of pasta with sauce and a green salad. Mira insisted on preparing dinner, Diane explained quietly. I just helped with the stove, of course. I made the pasta, Mira declared proudly. And the surprise is that you're having dinner here with us today. Miles felt something warm expand in his chest. A dinner, something so simple, so common for most people, but for him, it represented so much more. It wasn't a business dinner, not a casual meeting. It was a family inviting him to be part of their most intimate routine. This is the best surprise I could have received, he said, and the sincerity in his voice made Diane look at him with a new expression. The dinner was simple, but Miles couldn't remember the last time a meal had been so delicious. Mira dominated the conversation, telling them about her day at school, about how Tommy Perkins had gotten detention for pulling a girl's hair, and about how Miss Collins had praised her drawing of the digestive system. And you, how was your day? Diane asked Miles when Mira finally paused to eat. The question caught him by surprise. When was the last time someone had genuinely been interested in his day? "It was good," he replied, realizing how generic it sounded. "I had a meeting about a new project, nothing too exciting." "You look tired," Diane observed, her eyes assessing him carefully. "You work too much." "Probably," Miles admitted. "But lately I've been trying to balance things better." "Because of us?" Mira asked, her mouth still full of pasta. "Mira, don't talk with your mouth full," Diane gently chided. Miles smiled. "Yes, because of you," he replied, and saw how Mira's eyes lit up. After dinner, Mira insisted on showing Miles her room. It was a small space with a single bed, shelves with a few library books, and a desk where she drew and studied. On the wall hung the school uniform Miles had bought for her, carefully ironed and on a hanger. "Do you like my room?" she asked, anxious for approval. "It's wonderful," Miles answered honestly. "Very organized. Mommy says doctors need to be organized." When they returned to the living room, Diane was on the small balcony, looking at the night sky. Mira, tired after all the excitement, yawned deeply. "I think it's time for someone to go to bed," Diane said, coming back inside. "But it's still early." Mira automatically protested, though her eyes were already heavy. "It's almost 9, and you have school tomorrow," Diane replied firmly but kindly. "Go brush your teeth. I'll be there in a minute." Reluctantly, Mira obeyed, but not before giving Miles a tight hug. "Will you be here when I wake up?" she asked, looking at him with hope. The question caught Miles off guard. He looked at Diane, uncertain. "No, sweetie," Diane answered for him. "Miles has his own home to sleep in, but maybe he'll come back for dinner another day." "Promise?" Mira asked Miles. "I promise," he replied, feeling the weight and comfort of that promise. When Mira finally went to her room, Diane offered Miles a cup of coffee. They sat on the small balcony, watching the city lights and feeling the night breeze. "She adores you, you know," Diane said after a few moments of comfortable silence. "The feeling is mutual," Miles replied, looking at the cup in his hands. "She's incredible. You've done an incredible job raising her." Diane looked at him, her eyes reflecting the city lights. "It wasn't easy," she admitted. "It still isn't, but every sacrifice is worth it when I see her smile." "You never talk about her father," Miles commented, and immediately regretted it. "Sorry, it's none of my business." "No, it's okay," Diane said, surprising him. "There's not much to tell. He wasn't ready to be a father. He left before she was even born." Miles felt a wave of anger toward this unknown man who had abandoned two such extraordinary people. "He doesn't know what he lost," he said with conviction. Diane smiled, a sad but resigned smile. "For a long time I was angry, then I just accepted it. It's me and Mira against the world." She paused, looking directly at him. "Or at least it was until you showed up." Miles's heart sped up. "Diane, She gently raised her hand, interrupting him. "We don't need to define this, whatever it is. I just wanted you to know that." She took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "Thank you. You've brought more than just things. You've brought her peace." Miles felt a lump in his throat. "What do you mean?" "Before you came along, Mira always felt different from the other kids, incomplete somehow." Diane looked into the apartment, toward her daughter's room. "Since you came into our lives, she has more confidence. She smiles more. She feels normal." Miles absorbed those words, feeling their weight and importance. "Hayutu gave me what I never had," he finally replied. "Warmth, attention, real love." It was the first time he had used that word, and it came out naturally. "I spent my whole life accumulating things, achievements, properties, and at the end of the day I would come home to an empty apartment." Diane reached out her hand, lightly touching his on the table. "It's not empty anymore," she said simply. They sat like that for a while, hands gently touching, watching the night. There was no need for words. They both knew something important was growing between them, something that needed time and care to fully blossom. When Miles finally got up to leave, he felt different, lighter somehow, but also more anchored. As if he had finally found his place in the world. "Can I come back tomorrow?" he asked at the door. Diane smiled. and in that smile, there was promise and possibility. "We're making tacos. They're Mira's favorite. And yours?" "I prefer enchiladas," she replied, a mischievous glint in her eyes. "But tacos are a good compromise." "Then tacos it is," Miles said, returning the smile. As he closed the door behind him, Miles stood for a moment in the hallway. From inside the apartment, he could hear Diane's soft voice singing a lullaby to Mira. The sound enveloped him like a hug, making him realize a simple and profound truth. For the first time in his adult life, Miles Fletcher felt like he belonged somewhere. Not in his elegant office, not in his luxurious apartment, not at the exclusive clubs he frequented. He belonged in this small, third-floor apartment where a little girl dreamed of being a doctor and a woman faced the world with courage and grace. He belonged to this makeshift family that had somehow found room for him in their hearts. And as he walked to his car, Miles knew he would do anything to protect and nurture this new sense of belonging, this new chance at having a family, with care, with respect, with love. The night was cold when Miles left Diane and Mira's apartment. A light drizzle was beginning to fall, turning the city lights into colorful blurs through the windshield. He drove slowly, in no hurry to get home. On the radio, a soft song filled the silence, but Miles barely heard it. His mind was filled with images from the evening. Mira's smile when she showed him her room, the soft touch of Diane's hand on his, the smell of fresh coffee on the small balcony. Small moments that somehow seemed more significant than any major event in his previous life. At a red light, Miles opened the glove compartment to get a tissue. That's when his fingers touched something he had forgotten was there, the drawing Mira had given him weeks ago. He picked it up carefully, unfolding the paper, which was already a bit crumpled at the edges. There they were, the two stick figures, a tall one in a suit and a small figure with pigtails and a blue dress, holding hands, with a large red heart hovering above them. "They're Miles and Mira, best friends," the inscription read in colorful, crooked letters. The light turned green, but Miles didn't move immediately. He stared at that simple drawing a child had made for him. A gift with no monetary value, but with an emotional value he couldn't calculate. Horns honked behind him, bringing him back to reality. Miles carefully placed the drawing on the passenger seat and continued on his way. His downtown apartment seemed larger and emptier than ever when he entered. The automatic lights came on, revealing the immaculate and cold environment, expensive furniture chosen by a decorator, paintings selected by an art consultant, a state-of-the-art sound system he rarely used. Miles took off his coat and tie, leaving them on a chair. He picked up Mira's drawing and walked to the large panoramic window that overlooked the city below. The rain had intensified, and drops ran down the glass like silent tears. "What am I doing?" he muttered to himself, looking out at the city at night. At 42, Miles Fletcher had built a life that many envied. A successful company, robust bank accounts, properties in 3 different cities. He was the kind of man who appeared in business magazines, with the serious and confident demeanor of someone who knows exactly what he wants. But there, alone in his luxurious apartment, holding a child's drawing, Miles wondered if he had ever known what he really wanted. He walked slowly to the bar and poured himself a whiskey. Not to get drunk, he had never been a heavy drinker, but to feel the familiar warmth go down his throat, something comforting amidst the confusion of his thoughts. With the glass in one hand and the drawing in the other, Miles sat on the Italian leather sofa that had cost more than many people earn in a year. The contrast between that luxurious piece of furniture and the simple piece of paper in his hand could not have been more stark. "Best friends," he read aloud, running his fingers over the colorful letters. When was the last time he had a best friend? Maybe in college, or even earlier, in his teens. Over time, friends had turned into contacts, colleagues, business partners. Relationships measured by what they could offer, not by what they meant. "I never had this," Miles whispered to the empty apartment. "A sincere friendship, a real hug." He closed his eyes, remembering Mira's hug. So small and yet so immense. No ulterior motives, no expectations, no calculations. Just pure affection, offered freely. And Diane. The way she looked at him now, with a mix of gratitude and something more that he didn't dare to name, the way her hand had found his on the balcony, as if it were the natural place for it to be. Miles stood up and walked to the bedroom. On the nightstand, there was only a digital clock and a tablet. He opened the drawer and placed Mira's drawing inside, but he didn't close it immediately. He stared at that simple image, feeling a strange peace. Was it possible, at 42, to discover a part of himself he never knew existed? Was it possible to learn to love in a way he had never experienced? Miles took his phone out of his pocket and opened the photo gallery. Among the images of meetings and corporate events, he found what he was looking for, a photo they had taken at the park a few weeks ago. Mira in the middle, with an ice cream cone melting in her hand and a smile that took up half her face. Diane on the right, her blonde hair shining in the sun, a shy but genuine smile on her lips. And himself on the left, looking more relaxed than in any other photo he had. They looked like a family. The realization hit him with unexpected force. The longing he felt wasn't for comfort, luxury, or status. The longing was for them, for Mira and her contagious enthusiasm, for Diane and her quiet strength. Miles lay down on the king-size bed he had occupied alone for so many years. The silent apartment around him now seemed like a mausoleum rather than a home. He had built a fortress of solitude with bricks of professional success and mortar of ambition. But now something had changed inside him. A door that had been locked for decades had been opened by a small key. The smile of a child, the kindness of a single mother, the simplicity of a shared dinner at a table that was too small. For the first time in a long time, Miles fell asleep thinking not of contracts or meetings, but of laughter and hugs, of tacos for dinner tomorrow, of a girl who dreamed of being a doctor and a woman who created a home out of nothing. He was changing. The man who would wake up the next morning would not be exactly the same as the one who had fallen asleep. Little by little, day by day, Miles Fletcher was transforming, and surprisingly, he liked it. In the darkness of the room, illuminated only by the distant glow of the city outside, Miles smiled. The drawing in the drawer, the two stick figures holding hands, was more than a child's gift. It was a promise, a possibility, a future he had never considered, but which now seemed the only one that made sense. Tomorrow would be another day. There would be tacos, laughter, maybe another touch of hands, small moments that together were building something big, something real, something that was finally worth it. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. Almost without realizing it, Miles had created a new routine. Mondays and Thursdays were sacred, days when he picked up Mira from school and took her for a snack before meeting Diane. Saturdays were for spending the whole morning with them, shopping, visiting the park, or simply watching a children's movie on their small living room TV. And then, without any formal announcement, Tuesdays and Fridays also became visiting days. Soon, Miles only spent Wednesdays and Sundays in his own apartment, and even on those days, he exchanged constant messages with Diane and spoke to Mira on the phone before bed. On that autumn Tuesday, Miles left the office early. There was an important meeting scheduled for the late afternoon, but he delegated it to his vice president without a second thought. Years ago, this would have been unthinkable. Now it seemed the most natural thing in the world. On the way to Diane and Mira's apartment, he stopped at a small bakery. The smell of fresh bread greeted him as he entered, along with the smile of the owner, an Italian lady who already knew him by name. Mr. Fletcher, the usual. Yes, please, Mrs. Moretti. And that chocolate cake that Mira loves so much. Ah, for the little princess, the lady smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. You know, my husband says you seem different now. Different how? Miles asked, genuinely curious. Lighter. She made a vague gesture with her hands, like you've lifted a weight off your shoulders. It's good to see, Miles smiled, taking the bag she handed him. I think I am. When he arrived at the familiar building, Miles no longer needed to knock. He had his own key now, a small metal object that meant much more than access to an apartment. Still, out of respect, he always rang the doorbell before using the key. It's open, Diane's voice called from inside. He entered, feeling that familiar sense of warmth that always enveloped him when he crossed the threshold. The apartment hadn't changed much in recent months, but small details revealed his constant presence there. A pair of men's slippers next to the sofa, a mug with his name on the kitchen shelf, his coat hanging on the rack by the entrance. "I brought bread and cake," he announced, placing the bags on the kitchen counter. Diane was chopping vegetables, her blonde hair tied in a loose bun. She turned to him with a smile, and Miles felt that now familiar warmth in his chest. "You always bring something," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. You didn't have to. I like to." He moved closer and, in a gesture that was still new but already natural, kissed her lightly on the lips. "Where's Mira?" "In her room, finishing her homework. She said she has a surprise for you." Miles took off his suit jacket and hung it up carefully. Lately, he had been dressing more casually, still elegant, but less formal. Today, he wore only slacks and a light-colored shirt. No tie. "Need help?" he asked, looking at the amount of vegetables on the cutting board. "Always," Diane replied with a smile. There was something deeply comforting about cooking alongside her. Miles had never been very skilled in the kitchen. Years of meals in restaurants or delivered to his home had ensured that. But with Diane, he was learning. Chopping vegetables, seasoning sauces, even baking a simple cake last weekend. "How was your day?" she asked, as they worked side by side in the small kitchen. "Hectic. We're closing a deal with a Japanese company. Lots of bureaucracy, lots of meetings." "And you delegated today's meeting." It wasn't a question, and Miles smiled, realizing how well she knew him. "Yes. A few months ago, I would have stayed at the office until midnight. Now you have better places to be," she completed, lightly touching his arm. "Exactly." The sound of hurried footsteps interrupted the moment. Mira ran into the kitchen, her eyes shining with excitement. "Miles!" She threw herself into his arms, and he caught her mid-air, spinning her once before setting her down. "Did you bring cake?" "Mira, first say hello properly, then ask about presents." Diane gently chided her. "But I already knew he brought it. I could smell it," Mira protested, but then smiled at Miles. "Hi, Miles. How was your day?" He laughed at the sudden formality. "It was good, kiddo, and yours?" "Great. I got an A in math, and Miss Collins said my drawing of the solar system was the best in the class." She paused dramatically. "And Tommy Perkins apologized to me." That caught Miles by surprise. "Tommy Perkins? The same one who—" "Yes, that one," Diane confirmed, raising her eyebrows. Apparently, his father saw how he treated Mira at the last parent-teacher conference and was furious. "He gave me a chocolate bar and said he was sorry for being mean," Mira added with an air of importance. "I told him it was okay, but that he needed to be nice to everyone, not just me." Miles felt a wave of pride so intense, it almost knocked him off balance. "That was very mature of you, Mira." She shrugged, but her smile revealed she was pleased with the compliment. "Can I cut the cake?" "After dinner," Diane and Miles replied in unison, and then laughed at their synchronicity. Dinner was, as always, simple but delicious. Ratatouille with rice, Diane's specialty. As they ate, Mira dominated the conversation, talking about her day at school, her plans for the weekend and how she was saving her allowance to buy an anatomy book. Miles watched the mother and daughter, feeling a peace he had never experienced before. Here at this small table with a floral tablecloth, eating from simple, mismatched plates, he felt more at home than he ever had in his luxurious apartment. After dinner came the cake. Mira cut generous slices for everyone, and they sat in the living room to enjoy them. "Want more cake?" Mira asked Miles when he finished his slice, already preparing to run to the kitchen. "I do," he replied, and then added without thinking, "And I want to stay a little longer." Mira smiled as if he had said the most natural thing in the world. "You can stay forever if you want." Diane choked on her coffee, and Miles felt his face heat up. The simplicity with which Mira sometimes spoke caught him off guard. "Mira, go brush your teeth. It's getting late," Diane said, clearly trying to change the subject. "But it's still early. It's almost 9 o'clock, and you have school tomorrow." With an exaggerated sigh, Mira got up, but not before giving Miles a hug. "Good night. Will you be here when I wake up?" The question, so simple and direct, touched something deep within him. "Not this time, kiddo. But I'll be here for dinner tomorrow. Promise." "I promise." When Mira finally went to her room, Miles and Diane were left alone in the living room. A comfortable silence settled between them, the kind of silence that only exists between people who are completely at ease with each other. "She adores you," Diane said finally, leaning back on the sofa. "The feeling is mutual." Miles smiled, reaching for her hand. "You two changed my life, you know?" Diane gently squeezed his fingers. "You changed ours too." Miles looked around the room, taking in the details he had grown to love. The handmade curtains, the colorful cushions, the plants in the windows. His eyes landed on a photo on the bookshelf that he had never noticed before. It was partially hidden behind a vase, as if it had been placed there long ago and then forgotten. "What's that photo?" he asked, pointing. Diane followed his gaze and smiled. "Oh, that's an old picture. Let me get it." She stood up and went to the bookshelf, carefully removing the dusty frame. When she returned to the sofa, she handed it to Miles. The photo showed two young women, probably in their early 20s, hugging and smiling for the camera. Both wore jeans and t-shirts, with their hair loose in the wind. Behind them, what looked like a university campus could be seen. "This is my mum," Diane said, pointing to the blonde woman on the left. "And this was her best friend in college. They were inseparable, from what my mom told me." Miles looked more closely at the other woman in the photo. She had dark hair and light eyes, a wide smile that seemed to light up her whole face. There was something familiar about her, something that... And then he realized. The shock left him momentarily speechless. "This one," he began, his voice failing slightly. "This is my mother." It was Diane's turn to be shocked. "What? Elizabeth Fletcher?" "That was my mom's friend's name." Miles nodded, still staring at the photo. "Elizabeth Fletcher, my mother." They looked at each other, both processing the unbelievable coincidence. "But how?" Diane began, unable to complete the question. "I don't know." Miles shook his head, looking at the photo again. "My mother never mentioned a special friend from college. She rarely talked about the past." "Mine either." Diane took the photo, looking at it with new eyes. "She passed away when I was 16. Cancer." "I'm so sorry." Miles placed his hand over hers. "Mine passed away 5 years ago. A heart attack." They were silent for a moment, absorbing the strange connection they had just discovered. "Miles?" Mira's voice surprised them. She was standing at her bedroom door, wearing teddy bear pajamas. "Are you crying?" Only then did Miles realize there were tears in his eyes. He quickly wiped them away. "No, kiddo. I just got emotional about a discovery." Mira came closer, curious, looking at the photo in Diane's hands. "Who are they?" "This is my mom, your grandmother you never met," Diane explained, pointing. "And this, unbelievably, is Miles's mom." Mira's eyes widened. "Your mom and Miles's mom." She looked from one to the other, processing the information. Then, a slow smile spread across her face. "That's so cool. They were friends. Now we're friends too." The simplicity of the observation made Miles laugh. A light and genuine laugh, the kind he hadn't had in a long time. "Yes, I guess so. It's a small world. Indeed." "It's not a coincidence," Mira declared with the absolute certainty that only children possess. "It's destiny." Diane and Miles exchanged glances, and he saw in her eyes the same emotion he felt. "Maybe you're right, kiddo," he said softly. After Mira finally went to sleep, Miles and Diane stayed up late, trying to find out more about their mother's friendship. They found some old letters in a box that Diane kept, confirming that Elizabeth and Catherine had been best friends in college, but had lost touch when they moved to different cities after graduation. "It's like they started something that we were destined to continue," Diane said, leafing through the letters yellowed with time. Miles nodded thoughtfully. The past meeting the present? When they finally prepared to sleep, Miles realized he didn't want to leave, not tonight. Not after this discovery that seemed to seal the bond between them even further. "Stay," Diane said, as if reading his thoughts. "Just for the night. Mira will be happy to see you at breakfast." And so, for the first time, Miles spent the night in the small apartment. The sofa was uncomfortable for his tall frame, but he didn't mind. He fell asleep listening to the soft sounds of the house, the ticking of the clock on the wall, the low hum of the refrigerator, the rhythmic breathing of Diane and Mira in the nearby rooms. There, among simple dishes and gentle voices, between the rediscovered past and the welcoming present, Miles Fletcher finally felt at home. Not in a place, but in a feeling. The feeling of belonging, of being loved, of finally being where he was meant to be. It was a winter Thursday when Miles realized something was wrong. He had arranged to pick Mira up from school, as he did twice a week, but when he arrived at the gate, the girl wasn't waiting in her usual spot. Worried, he looked for Miss Collins. "Mr. Fletcher, Mira left early today," the teacher explained, adjusting her glasses. "The coordinator got a call from their neighbor, Mrs. Geller. It seems her mother wasn't feeling well." Miles's heart raced. "Thank you," he said quickly, already turning to leave. He drove to the apartment in record time, ignoring speed limits he normally respected. The familiar building had never seemed so far away. When he finally parked, he ran to the third floor without waiting for the elevator. He knocked on the door, but there was no answer. He used his key, entering hastily. "Diane? Mira?" "We're in here." Mira's small voice came from the bedroom. Miles found Diane lying in bed, with Mira sitting beside her, holding a glass of water with excessive care not to spill it. Diane's face was pale, with reddish patches on her cheeks, and her breathing seemed difficult, punctuated by a dry, painful cough. "Miles?" She tried to sit up, but was stopped by another coughing fit. "Don't push yourself," he said, approaching the bed. He placed his hand on her forehead, feeling the heat of the fever. "What happened?" It was Mira who answered, her voice small and frightened. "Mommy couldn't work. She has a really bad cough. She coughed up blood at work, and the manager called a cab." Miles looked at Diane, alarmed. "Blood? Diane, we need to go to the hospital now." "It's nothing," she protested weakly. "I just need to rest a little." "Mommy, please," Mira pleaded, her blue eyes filled with restrained tears. "You promised you'd go to the doctor if it got worse." Miles realized this wasn't the first time Diane had been unwell. The signs were there, the persistent cough he had noticed in recent weeks, the increasing fatigue, the pauses to catch her breath after climbing the stairs. "This isn't a suggestion, Diane," he said firmly. "We're going to the hospital now. I can carry you if I have to." Something in his tone, or perhaps Mira's frightened look, finally convinced Diane. She nodded weakly. "All right, but just a quick visit." It wasn't a quick visit. After the initial triage, Diane was immediately sent for tests. Miles stayed with Mira in the waiting room, trying to distract her with word games and stories, while his own heart pounded with worry. 3 hours later, the doctor finally appeared. Dr. Lawson, a middle-aged man with kind eyes behind square glasses, asked to speak with Miles privately. "I'm just a friend of the family," Miles explained, hesitant. "She asked me to speak with you," the doctor replied. "She said you're the closest person she has." Miles felt a tightness in his chest. He looked at Mira, who had fallen asleep on the bench, wrapped in his coat. "I'll be right here, I can see you," he said to the girl, who nodded sleepily. They moved just a few steps away. "How is she?" Miles asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Mrs. Walker has chronic lung disease," Dr. Lawson said bluntly. "The tests show significant damage to her lungs, likely caused by years of exposure to chemicals." "Chemicals?" She mentioned she's been working at a laundromat for almost 6 years. "The products used in those establishments, especially the solvents for dry cleaning, are extremely toxic when inhaled regularly." Miles closed his eyes for a moment, trying to process the information. "What's the treatment?" "We'll start a medication regimen to control the symptoms and slow the progression of the disease. But, Mr. Fletcher, the most important part of the treatment is a change of environment. She cannot continue working at that laundromat." Miles nodded, his mind already racing with possibilities. Can I see her? Of course. We're preparing her discharge papers. She can go home today, but she will need absolute rest for the next few days. Diane was sitting on the edge of a bed, wearing her clothes again. She looked small and frail under the fluorescent hospital lights, but there was a familiar determination in her eyes when she saw Miles. "Sorry about this," she said before he could say anything. "Don't apologize," Miles replied, sitting beside her. "Why didn't you tell me you were this sick?" Diane shrugged, a gesture he knew well, her way of downplaying problems. "I didn't want to worry anyone. I thought it would get better." "The doctor told me about your diagnosis." Miles took her hand. "Why did you keep working there, knowing it was making you sick?" A sad smile crossed Diane's face. "Bills don't pay themselves, Miles. And Mira needs to eat. She needs clothes. She needs her mother to be healthy," he completed softly. Diane's eyes filled with tears she tried to hold back. "I don't have a choice." "Yes, you do." Miles squeezed her hand. "I want to offer you a job with me." Diane blinked, surprised. "What?" "My company needs someone to manage the archives. It's light administrative work, in a clean, well-ventilated environment, with a decent salary." He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "You deserve more, Diane. And you will be paid better." "Miles, I don't have any office experience." "You're organized, attentive to detail, and a fast learner. Those are the qualities I need. The rest, you'll learn on the job." Diane shook her head, looking confused. Why would you do this?" Miles looked at her, this strong woman who had won his heart almost without him realizing it. "Because I care about you, about both of you." He smiled. "And because I'm the boss and I can hire whoever I want." A small laugh escaped Diane, quickly interrupted by a lighter coughing fit. "I don't want charity, Miles. It's not charity, it's recognition." He held both of her hands now. "Diane, you are the most hard-working and competent person I've ever met. It would be a privilege to have you on my team." Her eyes searched his, looking for any sign of pity or obligation. Finding nothing but sincerity, she finally nodded. "Okay, I'll accept, temporarily, until I find something on my own." Miles smiled, knowing it was the most he would get for now. "Deal. You start when you've recovered." "No rush." On the way home, Mira slept in the back seat of the car, exhausted from the day's stress. Diane looked out the window, watching the city lights pass in colorful blurs. "She was so scared," she said quietly. "When I started coughing up blood." Her voice broke. "Kids are stronger than we think," Miles replied, glancing briefly in the rearview mirror where he could see Mira asleep. "And now she knows you're going to be okay." "Am I?" Diane asked, a rare vulnerability in her voice. "You are." Miles reached out and held her hand. "I promise." The following weeks were full of adjustments. Diane spent the first few days on absolute rest, following the doctor's orders to the letter, more for Mira's sake than her own. Miles rearranged his schedule to be present as much as possible, bringing meals, helping with chores, and taking Mira to and from school. Claire, his secretary, raised her eyebrows when he announced Diane's hiring but asked no questions. She just smiled and said, "I'll get everything ready for when she can start." A month later, Diane entered the building of Miles's company for the first time. She wore a simple but elegant outfit they had bought together, grey slacks and a light blue blouse. Her blonde hair was tied in a neat bun, and there was a nervousness in her eyes that Miles found adorable. "Relax," he said quietly as they rode the elevator. "You'll do great." And she did. To no one's surprise, except perhaps Diane's own, she had a natural talent for organization and efficiency. Within a few days, she had already created a better system for the archives, identifying important documents that were poorly stored and proposing improvements to the processes. "Your girlfriend is a real find," Miles's vice president commented after a week. "We should have hired her years ago." Miles didn't correct the term girlfriend. In a way, that's what Diane had become, although they had never formally defined their relationship. There was mutual respect, an affection that grew every day, and moments of intimacy that didn't need labels. Best of all was seeing the transformation in Mira. With her mother working regular hours in a safe environment, the girl seemed to have shed an invisible weight from her shoulders. She studied more peacefully, laughed more, slept better. And she loved to visit her mum's office occasionally, sitting in an extra chair with her books and drawings, watching with admiration how Diane was respected by everyone. "Your mum is very good at what she does," Miles commented on one of these visits, while taking Mira for a hot chocolate in the building's cafeteria. "I know," Mira replied proudly. "She's always been good at everything. She just needed a chance." The child's simple wisdom often surprised him. Sundays became special days. Miles, who used to spend his weekends alone in his apartment or at empty social engagements, now had a ritual, lunch with Diane and Mira. Sometimes they cooked together, other times they ordered food, but they were always moments of genuine connection. On one of these Sundays, while they were washing dishes together after lunch, Mira had gone to play with a friend from the building. Diane looked at Miles with a thoughtful expression. "Do you know what Mira told me last night?" "What?" "That it's like you've always been a part of this place." Diane smiled, passing him a wet plate to dry. "And you know, I think she's right." Miles felt a familiar warmth spread through his chest. "Maybe because this is where I'm myself." Diane stopped what she was doing and turned to him. "And who are you, Miles Fletcher?" He thought for a moment, reflecting on how his life had changed in the past few months, how the ambitious, lonely man he was had transformed into someone who found joy in the simplest things, in a child's smile, in the soft touch of a hand, in the comfort of belonging. "Someone who finally understands what really matters," he replied, putting down the dish towel and gently touching her face. "Someone who doesn't have to pretend anymore." The kiss they shared was different from the previous ones, deeper, more meaningful. A silent promise that whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. That night, as Miles prepared to return to his apartment, Mira asked the question she always asked. "Will you be here when I wake up?" Before he could answer, Diane intervened. "Why don't you stay, Miles? Not just today, every day." The words hung in the air, laden with meaning. Miles looked from Diane to Mira, seeing hope in both of their eyes. "Are you sure?" he asked, his heart racing. "Absolutely," Diane replied, and Mira nodded emphatically. 2 weeks later, Miles's luxurious apartment was for sale. His personal belongings, surprisingly few for someone who had lived there for so long, had been moved to the small third-floor apartment, which now seemed fuller, more complete. Diane's cough had significantly subsided with the treatment and change of environment. Her face had regained its color, and there was a renewed energy in her movements. At work, she had already been promoted to administrative assistant with an even better salary. As for Mira, she remained determined to become a doctor one day, more inspired than ever after her mother's experience. "I'm going to study lung diseases," she declared one night during dinner, "so no one else gets sick like Mommy did." Miles and Diane exchanged looks, both feeling the same pride. Life wasn't perfect. There were difficult days, when Diane's illness left her more tired, or when financial worries still arose. But there was a fundamental difference. Now they faced everything together, as a family. A family that had formed by chance, by destiny, or perhaps by the connection between two young women in an old photograph, two friends who, without knowing it, had paved the way for their children to meet decades later. On a Sunday afternoon, as he watched Diane and Mira setting the table for lunch, Miles thought about how his life had changed, about the lonely businessman he was and the fulfilled man he had become. "What are you thinking about?" Diane asked, noticing his distant gaze. Miles smiled. "About how you two saved me." "Us?" Diane seemed surprised. "You're the one who saved us, Miles." He shook his head, moving closer to hug her. "No. You gave me much more than I could ever repay. You gave me a home." And there in that small apartment, amid sincere smiles and true love, Miles Fletcher finally understood what his mother had always tried to teach him, that true success was not measured by money or power, but by the ability to make a difference in the lives of those we love. And by that standard, he had never been more successful. Spring had come again. bringing flowers to the city's gardens and a warm breeze that announced longer days. A full year had passed since Miles had bought a pair of shoes for a girl he barely knew, a year of transformations, of discoveries, of a love that had grown naturally, like a plant that finally finds the right soil. The third-floor apartment no longer seemed so small. Or perhaps Miles had learned that space wasn't measured in square feet, but in shared moments. The walls had been painted, a weekend project the three of them undertook together amidst laughter and paint splatters. The kitchen got new shelves, built by Miles with Mira's technical supervision. The old sofa had been replaced by a more comfortable one, large enough to accommodate 3 people on movie nights. Small changes, big meanings. On that Saturday afternoon, Miles was home alone, preparing dinner while Diane attended a meeting at Mira's school, something about a special science project for which the girl had been selected. He smiled, thinking about how excited Mira had been, talking non-stop about cells and microscopes all week. The sound of the door opening interrupted his thoughts. "Miles!" Mira's voice filled the apartment even before he could see her radiant little face appear in the kitchen. "Guess what?" Let me think." Miles feigned concentration, wiping his hands on the apron he was wearing. "You won a Nobel Prize." "Almost," Mira laughed, tossing her backpack on the sofa and running to him. "My project was chosen for the state science fair." "Wow, that's incredible." Miles bent down to receive the girl's enthusiastic hug. "I knew you could do it." Diane entered right behind, looking equally proud, though a bit more restrained. "Miss Collins said it's the first time in 5 years that a first grader has been selected," she explained, hanging up her coat. "Our little genius." Mira blushed slightly, but her smile didn't fade. "I'm not a genius, I just really like science." "And you worked very hard," Miles added, stroking the girl's blonde hair. "This calls for a celebration. How about ice cream after dinner?" "Yes," Mira jumped up excitedly, before remembering something important. "But first, I want to show you something." She ran to her backpack and took out a notebook carefully covered in shiny blue paper. Miles recognized the material. They had bought it together last month, when Mira decided she needed a special notebook just for medical notes. "Come see," she called, sitting at the living room table. Miles and Diane exchanged complicit smiles before joining the girl. Mira opened the notebook with almost reverential care, revealing pages filled with colorful drawings and notes in her childish yet neat handwriting. "This is the heart," she explained, pointing to a surprisingly detailed drawing for a 6-year-old. "It has 4 main parts. The dirty blood comes in here, and the clean blood goes out here." Miles watched with genuine interest as Mira turned the pages, showing drawings of lungs, bones, cells, and even a brain colored with different shades for the parts that control different things. Each drawing was accompanied by small notes, some clearly inspired by the books they had read together, others the fruit of Mira's creative imagination. "This is impressive, kiddo," he said when she finally closed the notebook. "You're going to be an incredible doctor." Mira's eyes shone with the absolute certainty that only children possess. "When I become a doctor, you'll be my first patient," she declared solemnly. "Me?" Miles feigned concern. "What if I'm not sick?" "Everyone needs a checkup," Mira replied, using a term she had obviously learned recently. "I'll listen to your heart and take your blood pressure and give you vitamins." Miles and Diane laughed at the seriousness with which she planned her future. "It will be an honor to be your first patient, Doctor Walker," Miles said, giving a small bow that drew more laughter from Mira. "And Mommy will be the second," the girl added, hugging Diane. "I can't wait," Diane replied, kissing the top of her daughter's head. After dinner and the promised ice cream, Diane went to take a shower, leaving Miles and Mira alone in the living room. The girl had snuggled up next to him on the sofa, leafing through her precious science notebook again. "Miles?" she asked suddenly, without looking up from the notebook. "Yes, kiddo." "Are you and Mommy going to get married?" The question caught him off guard. He and Diane had never formally discussed marriage, although they had been living together for months, sharing responsibilities, joys, and worries like any family. "Why do you ask?" he replied, buying time to organize his thoughts. Mira shrugged, a gesture she had clearly learned from her mother. Tommy Perkins said you're not a real family because you're not married. Miles felt a pang of irritation at the said Tommy Perkins, who, despite improving his behavior, still seemed to have a knack for occasionally upsetting Mira. Well, Tommy Perkins is wrong, he said firmly. Families come in all shapes and sizes. What makes a real family is love, not a piece of paper. Mira seemed to consider this answer for a moment. But you love each other, right? Very much, Miles replied without hesitation. I love your mom, and I love you. That seemed to satisfy her. Mira closed the notebook and turned to him, her blue eyes fixed on his with an intensity that sometimes surprised him. Did you know you're my best friend? The simplicity of the declaration hit Miles with unexpected force. In his entire adult life, surrounded by partners, colleagues, and acquaintances, he had never experienced the purity of the friendship that this little girl offered him. Am I? He asked, his voice slightly hoarse. Of course you are, Mira replied, as if it were obvious. For you play with me, you help me with my homework, you tell me stories, and you never ever lie to me. She paused. And you make mommy smile. That's what best friends do. Mira leaned in and hugged him tightly, her thin little arms wrapping around his neck with surprising strength. You're my best friend, she repeated, her face buried in his shoulder. Miles felt his eyes well up. He hugged her back, breathing in the scent of baby shampoo and the indefinable essence of innocence that was uniquely hers. And you're my best friend, he replied, his voice thick with emotion. When Diane returned to the living room, she found them still hugging, Miles with his eyes closed, an expression of absolute peace on his face. She smiled, silently observing the scene for a moment before joining them on the sofa. Group hug? She asked with a smile. Mira pulled back just enough to extend an arm and include her mother in the hug. The three of them stayed like that for a while, connected, complete. Later, after Mira had fallen asleep, Miles paused in the living room to contemplate the small changes that truly made this place a home. On the wall, lovingly framed, was the old drawing Mira had made months ago, two stick figures holding hands under a large red heart. On the bookshelf, holding a place of honor, was the photo of the two young mothers embracing, smiling for the camera, unaware that their children would meet decades later. What are you thinking about? Diane asked, hugging him from behind. Miles smiled, covering her hands with his. About how lucky we are. We are, aren't we? She rested her head on his shoulder. Who would have thought a pair of shoes would change our lives? Miles turned to face her, gently touching her face. It wasn't the shoes, it was Mira. It was you. It was destiny, maybe. Diane smiled, that smile that still made his heart race. Destiny, I like that. Now, there was another family in that house. Not the family any of them had planned or expected, but the family they needed to be. And a home that had welcomed three hearts, teaching them to beat in the same rhythm, in the same harmony, in the same song of love. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. Leave a like, because it helps this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next story.